The crowd erupted in laughter before I could even catch my breath. Cold water soaked through my champagne-colored dress, glittering beneath the ballroom lights like broken glass. My palms trembled as I pushed myself up from the marble edge of the golden fountain. And there he stood, my father, Richard Monroe, the man who once called me his pride. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos. And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation. Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. You still show your face here? He barked, his voice echoing through the hall filled with roses, cameras, and fake smiles. You have no shame, Ava? Gasps. Whispers. The music died. I looked up, hair dripping, mascara bleeding down my cheeks, while my sister, Caroline, laughed behind her crystal flute. Dad, don't waste your energy, she said smugly. She just came to ruin my wedding like she ruins everything. My chest tightened. Every eye burned into me. Relatives, ex-friends, family friends who once asked for my college essays, now smirking like wolves circling a wound. Get her out. Caroline snapped to security. This is a private event. I could have screamed. I could have begged. But instead, I took a slow breath, smoothed my wet hair back, and forced a calm smile that made their laughter falter. All of you, I said softly, voice trembling but steadying. Remember this moment. A hush swept over the room. Something in my tone made even my father's smirk fade. And right then, that's when the deep thrum of rotor blades cut through the air outside. People turned. The glass chandeliers rattled. A gust of wind blasted through the open terrace doors, sending petals and papers swirling across the marble floor. The fountain lights reflected off the black and silver body of a descending helicopter. I didn't move. I didn't have to. The doors opened with a heavy thud as the pilot stepped out first, followed by a tall figure in a sharp navy suit, sleeves rolled just enough to show the glint of his watch. His presence sucked the air out of the hall. Daniel Hayes, my husband. The man everyone thought I'd lost when I ruined my life years ago. He walked straight through the stunned crowd, his expression unreadable until he saw me, drenched, humiliated, standing in the water that was supposed to make me look small. Ava, he said, his voice low, powerful. Are you hurt? My sister froze mid-smile. Wait, your husband? She stammered. My father's face drained of color. You married him? Daniel glanced at them, then back at me. They touched you. His jaw clenched. Which one? Silence fell so deep you could hear the fountain dripping behind me. I stepped out slowly, my heels echoing on the marble. No one needs to answer, I said quietly, meeting every shocked stare. Because after tonight, they'll all find out who they really insulted. The band stood frozen. Guests whispered. Even Caroline's groom looked ready to faint. Daniel took off his jacket, draped it over my shoulders, and turned to the crowd. My wife, he said coldly, was humiliated in front of hundreds. And you call yourselves family? The hall went dead silent. Let's go, I whispered. As we walked out, camera still flashing, the whispers rose. Fear, guilt, realization spreading like wildfire. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The limousine door shut behind us, muting the chaos of the wedding hall. My soaked dress clung to my skin, and the faint echo of laughter still rang in my ears. Through the tinted window, I could see guests scattering like frightened pigeons, whispering, recording, pretending not to stare at the helicopter that had just landed on their precious estate. Daniel sat beside me, jaw tense, eyes burning with quiet fury. His hand brushed mine. "You okay?" he asked softly. I looked straight ahead, the reflection of the golden fountain glimmering in the glass. "I'm fine," I lied. My voice didn't even sound like mine. He sighed, his gaze still on me. "You shouldn't have gone there alone, Ava. You know what your father's capable of." "I needed to see them," I said, turning to him. I wanted to know if I could stand in front of them without breaking again. And I did. He nodded slowly, the city lights streaking across his face as the car rolled down the coastal road. "You did more than that. You made them realize who you've become." I smiled faintly, though my chest still burned from the humiliation. Funny. For years, they said I'd never be anything. I left home with nothing but a suitcase and a cracked phone. Now they think they can drown me in a fountain and walk away. Daniel's fingers tightened around mine. "They don't know what you've built, Ava. They don't know you're the silent investor behind half the Monroe projects they brag about." That made me laugh, a quiet, bitter laugh. If they did, they'd worship me. That's the thing about my family. Love's just another word for leverage. The driver turned down the private road to our beachfront estate. The ocean shimmered under the moonlight, calm and endless. As soon as we arrived, I stepped out barefoot, feeling the cool tiles under my feet. Daniel followed, shrugging off his tie, eyes still flickering with anger. He stopped me by the veranda, voice low. "What's the plan, Ava? You told them to remember this moment. What happens next?" The waves crashed softly beyond the glass railing. I turned toward him, my voice steady. "Next, they'll learn what happens when you push away the wrong daughter." The next morning, the Monroe mansion buzzed like a nest kicked open. Phones rang, reporters camped outside the gates, and my sister's perfect wedding headlines were hijacked by one photo. The moment Daniel draped his jacket over me. The caption? "Monroe heiress humiliated. Billionaire husband steps in." Caroline's face was plastered everywhere, her forced smile from that night now frozen in memes. She called my number 8 times. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat at my desk, scrolling through the digital contracts that connected the Monroe empire to Hayes Enterprises, my husband's corporation. What they didn't know was that months ago, Daniel had quietly acquired 40% of their business debt. And I'd been the one who advised him to do it. A knock interrupted my thoughts. Daniel walked in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You've been up since 5, he said, setting one beside me. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Too many headlines to read." He smiled faintly. "You don't have to rush it. The world already knows who you are now." I looked up, eyes sharp. "Not yet. They'll know tomorrow." Later that afternoon, Caroline finally sent a message. "Caroline, you're destroying my reputation. Do you know what you've done?" I typed back. "Me. Not yet. But you will." 10 minutes later, I got a call from my father. His voice trembled, something I hadn't heard since I was 16. "Ava, we need to talk. The board's panicking. Investors are pulling out. Whatever you and that husband of yours are doing, stop." I leaned back in my chair. "You told me never to show my face again, remember? Maybe this is me following orders." "Ava," he snapped, "you're still my daughter." That word, daughter, burned like acid. "You only remembered that after you saw headlines." He went quiet. "Please, come home. We can fix this." "I am home," I said, voice calm but cold. "And I don't fix things anymore. I replace them." I ended the call and set my phone down. My hands trembled slightly, not from guilt, but from release. For years, they'd taken my silence as weakness. They never realized silence could also be strategy. Daniel came up behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You sure you're ready for this?" I turned to him with a faint smirk. "They built their kingdom on lies, Daniel. I'm just removing the foundation." He nodded slowly. "Then let's make it official." By evening, the statement went live. Hayes Enterprises acquires Monroe Group, full ownership effective immediately. Within an hour, the Monroe name, my family's name, was trending worldwide. Caroline's dream wedding became a meme. My father's empire was reduced to an afterthought. But me? I finally felt weightless. That night, as Daniel poured 2 glasses of wine on the balcony, he looked at me with a half smile. "You told them to remember that moment by the fountain," he said. I took the glass, eyes gleaming in the city light. I made sure they never forget it. By sunrise, the Monroe estate looked less like a mansion and more like a battlefield. Reporters clustered at the gates, shouting questions, cameras flashing like gunfire. My father's empire, his pride, his identity, was collapsing faster than he could lie. From the safety of our balcony, I watched it all unfold on live TV. The same people who clapped when I was shoved into that fountain were now tripping over microphones to defend themselves. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel walked in behind me, crisp and composed, holding his phone. "They're asking for a press statement," he said. "Do you want to make one?" I turned to him, my lips curving slightly. "Not yet. Let them sweat. The longer they stay silent, the more the world writes the story for them." He nodded approvingly. "You've learned fast." "I learned from being underestimated," I said, staring at the waves. "That's the best teacher there is." By noon, my father finally called again. His tone completely changed. Gone was the arrogance. His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Ava, please. Let's talk in person. Come to the house." For a moment, I almost said no. But something in his voice, the same man who once refused to even look at me, made me curious. So I agreed. When our car pulled into the driveway, I saw it. The golden fountain still glistening in the center, the same one he'd pushed me into. Except now there were no wedding guests, no laughter. Just silence and shame. Caroline stood at the door in her designer robe, mascara smudged, eyes swollen. "You've ruined everything," she hissed. I walked past her without a word, heels clicking against the marble. Inside, my father sat in the lounge, surrounded by shattered pieces of his legacy, contracts, photographs, trophies of a life he'd built on ego. "Sit down," he said, voice trembling slightly. I stayed standing. "I think I'll stand. Easier to leave when I'm done." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You've made your point, Ava. You've embarrassed us enough. Tell your husband to withdraw the acquisition. I'll compensate you. Whatever you want." I raised an eyebrow. "You think this was about money? Then what?" he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "Revenge." I leaned forward, eyes locked on his. "Respect. You took that from me long before you took anything else." He looked away. "You walked out on this family." "I was thrown out," I corrected sharply. "And you cheered while I fell. Remember the fountain? The cameras?" The way Caroline laughed. My sister crossed her arms behind him, muttering, "You humiliated yourself." I turned to her. "You think humiliation is what I felt?" "No." It was clarity. That was the moment I stopped needing your approval. Caroline rolled her eyes. "So, this is your victory? Taking Dad's company? You're pathetic." Before I could speak, Daniel stepped inside, his presence commanding the room. "Careful," he said evenly. "That company belongs to my wife now. You do well to show her the respect she's earned." Caroline's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious." "Oh, he's serious," I said quietly. "Every contract, every deal, every property, Hayes Enterprises now owns it all. You don't even live here anymore." The paperwork was finalized at dawn. Her face went pale. "You're lying." "Check your email," Daniel replied coolly. She fumbled for her phone, her expression twisting as the truth sank in. You took everything." I smiled softly. "No, I just took back what was mine." My father rose to his feet, anger flickering through his despair. "You've destroyed this family." I took a slow breath, meeting his glare. "No, Dad. You destroyed it the moment you decided I wasn't worthy of your name." For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the faint trickle of water from that golden fountain filled the silence. Then, quietly, my father sank back into his chair, eyes hollow. "You have no idea what you've done," he whispered. I stepped closer. "Actually," I said, voice calm but sharp, "I know exactly what I've done. I've shown the world who the Monroes really are. The kind of people who push their own daughter into a fountain to impress strangers." He looked up at me with something between regret and disbelief. "And what now, Ava? You think you're better than us?" I paused. "No. I just chose not to become like you." Then I turned to leave. Daniel followed, his hand resting lightly on my back. But before stepping outside, I glanced at Caroline one last time. "One day, when the cameras stop coming and the lights go out, you'll remember that night by the fountain and realize that was the moment your kingdom began to fall." She didn't reply. She didn't have to. The look on her face said it all. As we stepped outside, the sun broke through the clouds, glinting off the water. I stopped by the fountain, staring at my reflection in its golden ripples. Once, this place had drowned me in shame. Now it reflected my power. Daniel came up beside me, whispering, "Ready to go home?" I smiled faintly. "Yeah, let's leave them to their silence." We walked toward the waiting helicopter. Cameras clicked again, but this time, every flash was applause, not mockery. Behind us, the Monroe mansion grew smaller, just a gilded shell of what it once was. And as the helicopter lifted off, the wind carried the fountain's water upward, scattering sunlight in 1,000 directions, just like the moment I decided never to break again. The ocean wind whipped through my hair as the helicopter soared over the cliffs. Below, the Monroe estate shrank into nothing but a shadow on the coastline. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the vibration beneath my feet, the hum of freedom that felt heavier than silence. Daniel watched me from across the cabin, his expression softer now. "It's over," he said gently. I looked out the window, voice quiet. "No, Daniel. It's not over. It's different. They've always thought power was about control. I just showed them it's about consequence." He smiled faintly, resting his arm across the seat. "You know, when I first met you, I didn't realize how strong you were. You were working 3 jobs, barely sleeping, still helping others. You didn't break then. And you didn't break today." I turned to him, my chest tight but light. "That's because I stopped needing their approval. The moment you stop asking for permission to exist, that's when you start living." He reached out, his fingers brushing mine. "And that's the woman they'll never be able to destroy." By the time we landed back at our villa, the sun was setting across the horizon, casting everything in gold and rose. I stepped out first, my heels clicking on the wooden deck, and for the first time in years, I felt grounded. No shame, no fear, no anger left to carry. Inside, my phone buzzed nonstop with messages, some apologizing, some pretending they'd always believed in me. I muted them all, but one message caught my eye. It was from my father. Just 3 words. I'm proud now. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then placed the phone face down on the table. My heart didn't ache anymore. That chapter was done. I walked to the balcony overlooking the beach. Below, the tide was coming in, washing away footprints from the day before. The same way life quietly erases the marks of pain when you stop clinging to them. Daniel joined me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "You're quiet," he said softly. I nodded, just thinking how strange it feels to finally win. It doesn't look how I imagined. It's peaceful. He smiled. Peace always comes after truth. For a moment, I just listened to the sound of waves, the rustle of palms, the distant cry of gulls. And somewhere deep inside, I could still hear echoes of that night. The laughter, the splash of water, my father's voice full of hate. But now they felt like sounds from another lifetime. You know what the best part is? I said after a while. What? I didn't have to scream to be heard. I just had to rise. He looked at me with quiet pride. You did more than rise, Ava. You built a life they'll spend the rest of theirs trying to understand. I smiled faintly, resting my head on his shoulder as the last light faded over the ocean. Let them. I don't need them to understand. I just need them to remember. 2 weeks later, the media had moved on. The Monroe name had been replaced by Hayes Industries on every corporate building, every news ticker, every investor's feed. My sister and father were nowhere to be seen. Rumors said they'd left the city. But I didn't check. I didn't need to, because the real victory wasn't in headlines, money, or revenge. It was walking through my garden every morning, breathing freely, knowing I no longer owed anyone an apology for existing. Sometimes, when the wind was right, I'd still hear echoes of that fountain in my dreams, the water glimmering, laughter fading, and I'd smile. Because that was the night they tried to drown me, and I learned how to walk on water. And that was the moment they finally broke, when I didn't.